They laughed, whispered that I probably couldn't afford the wine. But when the bill came, the waiter turned to me and said, "Shall I charge it to your account, chef? This isn't just about money. It's about respect, legacy, and proving that silence can be the loudest answer." If you've ever been the black sheep, this story will hit home. Sophia hadn't seen her family's handwriting in years. Not on paper, anyway. These days, even strained relationships relied on quick texts, holiday emojis, and the occasional obligatory "Hope you're well" from her brother Nathan. So when she found the envelope, elegant, heavy, and cream-colored with a rose gold sheen waiting just inside her apartment door, her breath caught. She recognized the return address instantly: Margaret Winslow Hartley, etched in fine cursive, the kind used for trust fund communications and social galas. Her mother's handwriting was a signature of the old world. They belonged to moneyed, meticulous, cold as glass. Sophia turned the envelope over in her hand, heart knocking once against her ribs. On the front, Miss Sophia Hartley. Not Chef Sophia Hartley. Not Miss. Not even her full name. Just the version of herself they had approved of before. Before she'd burned the script they wrote for her and walked off stage without permission. Her fingers were steady as she slid open the envelope, but her pulse betrayed her. The card inside was as formal as it was familiar. "Clara Hartley and Bradley McAllister request the pleasure of your company to celebrate their engagement." It was printed on cardstock so thick it nearly resisted the fold. Sophia's eyes trailed down to the venue. Ellen. Saturday, 7:30 p.m. Center table reserved. Ellen. She blinked, then read it again. Ellen, her restaurant. Her sanctuary. Her rebellion built into brick and linen and bone-white plateware. Her masterpiece. Her life's work. The irony bloomed in her chest, sharp and bitter like citrus peel. After everything, after the silence, the shame, the condescension, they were gathering to toast Clara's perfect engagement in the very space Sophia had created with blistered hands and sleepless nights. They didn't know. Of course they didn't. They'd chosen the venue for its reputation, not realizing that every flavor they'd taste, every detail they'd photograph for social media was hers. Every detail, down to the hand-dyed napkins and the seasonal micrograins, had passed through her fingertips. It wasn't just a place she worked. It was her. It was her revenge in silk and steel. She sat down on the edge of her bed, the card limp in her lap, and tried to steady her breathing. 5 years. That's how long it had been since she walked out of the Beacon Hill townhouse with nothing but a duffel bag and a cracked iPhone. 5 years since she'd told her parents that she was leaving Wharton's MBA program to pursue culinary school. 5 years since her father's voice dropped into that icy register he reserved for true disappointments. "We raised you for more than this." 5 years since her mother's silence struck harder than any slap, her eyes scanning Sophia's face as if searching for the daughter she'd once had and not finding her there. They hadn't spoken since, not really. A couple of dry texts. A Christmas card with no return address. She sometimes wondered if they even knew what city she lived in. Perhaps they still thought she was scraping plates in someone else's kitchen, living off tips and ramen noodles, waiting for reality to snap her back into line. Maybe that's what they needed to believe to maintain their myth of the Golden Hartley family, untarnished by failure or rebellion. She rose from the bed and walked into the kitchen, the card still in her hand. The space was small but warm, filled with the scent of herbs she kept in clay pots by the window: thyme, basil, rosemary. The kind of kitchen her mother would call quaint, with a forced smile. She put on a kettle not because she wanted tea, but because she needed the sound, the comfort of ritual. Could she really sit at a table with them again? Let them study her clothes, her skin, her posture, searching for signs of defeat or regret? Could she listen as they praised Clara's fiancé Bradley with his Ivy League resume and unnaturally symmetrical face, and pretend she didn't still carry the scars of their rejection? Sophia wrapped her hands around the mug, let the heat seep into her fingers. The truth was, she hadn't thought about them in weeks, maybe months. Her days were full, sometimes too full to think. Running Aylin meant 18-hour stretches, last-minute crises, creative breakthroughs, wine deliveries gone wrong, and sauces that turned miracles with 1 degree of heat. It was exhausting and intoxicating and entirely hers. But this letter, this invitation, had torn something open. Not because she wanted their approval, not anymore. but because some small part of her still wanted them to know. Not what she'd achieved necessarily, but who she'd become. She didn't need them to clap, she just wanted them to see her. Truly. That night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling. She imagined arriving at Elan in a simple dress, sliding into her seat like any other guest, listening to them critique the wine list she curated, the dishes she invented. She imagined their faces when they found out. The moment the truth would hit, soft or seismic, she couldn't tell. But she also imagined herself saying nothing. Letting the food speak. Letting them taste her growth, her persistence, her defiance in citrus foam and seared duck and handmade tagliatelle. Maybe that would be enough. She rose just before dawn and went into the restaurant. No staff yet, just her and the quiet. She walked the dining room slowly, touching the backs of chairs, adjusting a candle, listening to the echo of her own footsteps. The walls were painted a warm ivory, the lighting soft but deliberate. It looked like a dream made real because it was. Her dream. Her reality. She paused in front of table 7, the center one. The one her family had booked. She could already see them there, all polished surfaces and well-practiced smiles. And she could see herself sitting with them, but not of them. Not anymore. By noon her decision was made. She would go. Not to prove anything. Not to demand apologies or relive old arguments. She would go because she needed to close the door with her head held high. She would go because she wanted to stand in her own creation and know that she had built something they could never take away. She would go because for too long she'd carried the role of the family failure, and now finally she was ready to put it down. Let them toast perfection. Let them drink to legacy. She would sit there and sip her water, calm and unshaken. And when the moment came, and it would, she would speak with grace and steel in equal measure. Not to seek redemption, but to reclaim the narrative. No longer the daughter who failed. Not the rebel, the runaway, the embarrassment. Just Sophia. Exactly as she was. Exactly as she was meant to be. The decision to attend the engagement dinner should have quieted something inside Sophia, but instead it stirred old dust. That evening, as she folded linen napkins in the back office of Elan, a mindless task she often used to center herself, memories she thought she had neatly archived began to rise like steam from a forgotten pot. She could still see it, the grand house on Greenwich Lane, 3 stories of manicured perfection where everything was curated, including the emotions. The white shutters gleamed year-round, and even the hydrangeas outside the wrought iron gate bloomed as if in performance. To outsiders, the Hartleys were a picture of generational success, old Boston, money, elite education, philanthropy, brunches, and holiday cards that looked like they belonged in magazines. But Sophia remembered the quiet coldness inside, the way success was measured in GPAs and SATs, and which boarding school recruiter called first. There was love somewhere in that house, but it was conditional, ornamental, something like the silver cutlery only brought out when it matched the occasion. Her father, Richard Hartley, was a man of spreadsheets and private clubs who spoke of his children as investments with high potential. Her mother, Margaret, floated through rooms like a diplomat at a gala, gracious, reserved, and painfully exacting. Margaret's love came in compliments only when they could be shared with others. Clara just secured her internship at the law firm she would beam. Nathan is being scouted by MIT. When it came to Sophia, her praise always paused. Sophia is very spirited, she would say, or worse. Sophia's a little different, but she'll find her path. The message was always the same. Sophia was a variable in a life carefully designed to avoid them. Her siblings learned the script early. Clara had been born elegant, it seemed valedictorian, model UN star, a planner of charity events by sophomore year. She had the kind of bone structure that made designers beg for fittings, and the kind of ambition that needed no room for softness. Nathan, 2 years younger than Sophia, had a mind built for numbers, always solving equations like puzzles, never messy, never loud. And then there was Sophia, the middle child, the wild card, the one who spent more time in the kitchen with the housekeeper than in prep school study halls. While Clara practiced speeches in the mirror and Nathan rehearsed piano for scholarships, Sophia watched garlic caramelize in butter with reverence. She learned to read people not through debate or analysis but through the way they ate, who salted before tasting, who closed their eyes after the first bite. In a house that worshipped achievement, she sought refuge in instinct. Lucia was the first person who ever looked at her with real warmth. A stout woman from Naples with eyes that crinkled before her mouth, did Lucia ruled the kitchen with bare hands and sharp intuition. "You feel your way," she told Sofia once, tapping her chest. "Cooking isn't math, it's hard amour." Sofia believed her. In Lucia's domain, she wasn't strange or insufficient. She was precise. Talented. Enough. By age 10, Sofia could fillet a fish better than most adults. By 12, she had memorized the scent of lemon zest lifting from olive oil when warmed just right. By 13, she began keeping a notebook of recipes that reflected mood more than measurement: rainy day, risotto, angry chocolate torte, disappointed Sunday roast. It was her private language. Her salvation. And yet, when she once mentioned to her parents, half joking, that she might want to become a chef, her father looked up from his paper and said, "Chefs are hired help, Sofia. We dine, we don't cook." Her mother's smile tightened. "Darling," she said with that voice she reserved for correction, disguised as kindness. "You're too bright to spend your life in a kitchen. Surely you want more than that." It was not a question. It was a warning. The message solidified a few years later at a family brunch when Clara had just been accepted into Yale's pre-law program and Nathan had scored a perfect PSAT. Sofia had just hosted a secret 5-course meal in Lucia's absence for a few friends from school, every dish plated with care, dessert lit with handmade sugar flames. Margaret had found the receipts, the mess, the lingering scent of cumin and cocoa. She said nothing at first. But later, as they sat under the pergola with champagne and silver fruit forks, Margaret leaned over and said, "You're a sweet kind of pain, Sofia. A lovely complication." Sofia smiled tightly, unsure what to do with that, a compliment, a curse. Both. She would carry that sentence with her longer than anyone imagined. It was Margaret's love letter and dismissal in one. "You are beautiful, but not what I wanted." Years later, while tossing chopped rosemary into roasted grapes for Aylen's signature duck dish, Sofia sometimes heard the words again, unbidden. A sweet kind of pain. She had tasted every shade of that phrase in her life, the sting of being different, the ache of not belonging, the slow burn of ambition born in a house that didn't believe in her kind of dreams. What hurt wasn't just their lack of understanding, it was their lack of curiosity. Not once had they asked what made her happy. Not once had they stepped into her world without trying to edit it. Everything was about what she could become that would reflect well on them, not who she already was. There was a hollow in that house that echoed louder than any argument. They loved the idea of their children, but Sofia had always known she was the wrong kind of story, and yet she had still opened their invitation. She still remembered the color of the ribbon in Clara's hair on Christmas morning, the way Nathan used to sneak her cookies before dinner when their parents weren't looking. She remembered the night her father tucked her in after a fever, stroking her hair once before leaving. They weren't monsters, just limited. Blind in a way that affluence often allowed, their privilege so dense it muffled empathy. But now they were walking into her restaurant, unaware they would soon dine in the heart of her journey. They would sit under the chandeliers she'd chosen for their warmth, not opulence. They would eat from plates she'd handpicked, drink wine she'd tasted from dusty vineyards herself. They would be wrapped in her labor, her taste, her triumph, and not even know it. Sofia folded the last napkin and set it aside. She looked out the window where dusk had started to settle over the city. The skyline shimmered, blurred by the mist that clung to the glass. Somewhere her mother was probably rehearsing her toast. Clara was likely choosing earrings. Nathan might be double-checking the reservation. None of them knew they were about to sit face to face with the daughter who had stopped asking for permission. Sofia hadn't cried the night she left Wharton, but she had felt something colder than fear settle into her chest as she rode the midnight train from Philadelphia to New York. Something like exile, something like freedom. Her duffel bag sat at her feet, stuffed with clothes she no longer cared about, notebooks filled with flavor pairings, and a single chef's knife she'd splurged on 2 birthdays ago, back when all this had still been fantasy. She had walked away from the kind of life her parents built like a fortress around her six-figure promises, Ivy League legacy, the comfort of inherited status. And in return she had received silence, not a call, not a question, not even anger, just absence. It was their final act of control to erase her without raising their voices. In that void, Sophia began again. The beginning was brutal. She moved into a fifth-floor walk-up in Queens with 3 other women she'd met on Craigslist, 2 of whom worked night shifts and left their takeout containers in the fridge like landmines. Her bedroom was just wide enough for a futon and a milk crate that doubled as a nightstand. Every morning she woke at 4:30 a.m. to prep at a bakery in Astoria, her hands aching from repetitive motions and freezer burns. From noon to 10, she worked as a line cook at a family-run trattoria in Midtown, an underpaid, underappreciated cog in a kitchen where shouting was sport and sexual innuendo was part of the air supply. On weekends, she picked up catering gigs, sometimes chopping vegetables in hotel basements until her legs went numb. She barely slept. She barely spoke. But every time she stood behind a stove, something inside her clicked into place. What no one tells you about starting over is how physical it is. Her arms grew stronger, her back tighter, her fingers calloused in places she didn't know could blister. She bled often. She learned to move quickly, efficiently, invisibly. She learned the rhythm of service, the music of knives against boards, pans hissing like serpents, voices barking orders in syncopated staccato. But more than that, she learned how small a woman could feel in a room built to exclude her. Most kitchens she entered were kingdoms of testosterone, male-dominated war zones, where she was either invisible or too visible and never safe in either state. She heard sweetheart more than her name. She was told to stick to pastries or help with the plating while the men handled fire and meat. Once when she corrected a Sioux chef's sauce temperature, he stared at her like she'd insulted his lineage and muttered, "What are you even doing here?" That night she stayed after hours and recooked every dish from that shift until they were perfect. No one saw. No one needed to. She did it for herself. It was during this purgatory of exhaustion that she first encountered Chef Laurent Deschamps. She hadn't meant to. He was in town for a lecture series at the Culinary Institute, and Sophia had been assigned to help with the catering team. The brief was simple: don't talk to the chef. Just serve. Just disappear. But that afternoon the event manager panicked. One of the featured dishes had collapsed, a sauce congealed under heat lamps. Sophia, too tired to hesitate, remade it from scratch with what was left in the fridge and her instincts. Laurent noticed. Later, as guests drifted away, he approached her. He wasn't tall, but he had a presence that filled the room like smoke, quiet but unmistakable. "Who taught you to reduce like that?" he asked, his French accent thick, his tone serious. She paused, wary. "No one," she said. "Books. Practice." He tilted his head. "You understand balance. Depth. Most young cooks don't. You are not just following instructions, you are listening to the food." Sophia blinked. No one had ever said it like that. Not even Lucia. "I don't know if I'm good enough yet," she admitted. Laurent didn't smile. He reached into his coat and handed her a plain white card. "Come to my kitchen," he said. "I will make you a chef. Not just someone who cooks, but someone who knows why." She stared at that card for 2 full days before calling. When she did, everything changed. Laurent's kitchen was not a classroom. It was a forge. He demanded precision, presence, and something even more terrifying: originality. "Technique is the spine," he told her. "But the soul, that's yours to find." He didn't care that she was a woman. He cared that she could take critique without flinching. He cared that she could plate a dish that told a story. He cared that she didn't flinch when things went wrong but learned to pivot, adjust, try again. In his kitchen, she became more than useful. She became essential. One night, long after service ended, she stayed behind to remake a lamb dish that hadn't landed with a guest. She adjusted the spice, changed the char, rebalanced the sauce. Laurent watched quietly. When she finally plated it, heart pounding, he tasted in silence. Then softly he said, "I do not need you to cook like me. I need you to cook like someone who knows why she's doing it." Those words stayed with her longer than any recipe. By the end of that year, she had gone from nameless line cook to sous chef in one of the most respected kitchens in Manhattan. Not because she networked or charmed, but because she showed up. She survived. She listened to fire. She learned to sharpen blades and to dull her need for outside validation. Sophia had not simply become a chef, she had become a woman who refused to shrink for the comfort of others. But the wounds hadn't vanished. Every time a male investor asked to speak to the real owner, every time a guest complimented her food and assumed a man had made it, the past would knock softly at her door. She would think of her mother's voice, her father's shrug, Clara's laughter, the house on Greenwich Lane with its endless dinner parties and empty warmth. And then she would wipe her hands, square her shoulders, and keep going. She didn't need them to believe in her anymore. She had forged belief in fire and steel between the scars on her hands and the quiet pride in her chest. And now they were coming to her table. Aylin did not arrive with fanfare. It wasn't announced in the papers or splashed across city billboards. It didn't have investors throwing lavish launch parties or influencers posing under neon signage. It began with a single quiet idea, a restaurant that felt like a conversation. Not a transaction. Not a performance, but a living, breathing exchange between ingredients and memory, between flavors and feeling, between the person behind the plate and the one tasting it. Sophia had never wanted something flashy. She wanted something honest. The opportunity came when Laurent introduced her to James Wu, a venture capitalist with a penchant for underdogs and an unexpectedly sophisticated palate. He had tasted Sophia's spring pea and mint tartlet at a private fundraiser and requested to meet the chef. He was surprised to find someone so young, even more surprised that she wasn't already headlining her own space. "You don't belong in someone else's kitchen," he told her, sipping a glass of Gruner Veltliner with thoughtful eyes. "You need your own stage." Within a month, they were scouting locations. What they found was a former nightclub on the Lower East Side, cracked tile floors, mirrored ceilings, and the faint scent of regret baked into the walls. Most people would have passed. Sophia saw potential. She imagined natural light, warm wood linen that didn't try too hard. A place where silence was golden and a meal could feel like a secret kept between you and the plate. She named it Ellen not just for the French elegance it implied, but for the deeper meaning, vital enthusiasm, distinctive flair, spirit. That's what she wanted guests to feel when they walked in. Not just impressed, but alive. Engaged. Present. She poured every inch of herself into its making. When others slept, she sketched floor plans. When she should have rested, she taste-tested her own sauces again and again. She handpicked the chairs, curved backs that invited, lingering, not rushing. She chose the lighting herself, rejecting harsh downlights in favor of golden halos that flattered skin and calmed nerves. She partnered with a ceramicist from Brooklyn to design plates that felt like canvases, not just dishes. Every scent, every texture, every note in the playlist, it all spoke in her voice. Even the bathrooms were intentional: eucalyptus-scented towels, matte brass fixtures, warm light that forgave tired eyes. The menu was its own kind of poetry. It changed seasonally, yes, but it always carried her emotional lexicon: dishes that told stories. Her beet tartare with black garlic vinaigrette, inspired by long-forgotten childhood dinners with Lucia. The rosemary smoked duck, a nod to her nights of exhaustion and resilience. Her lemon basil semifreddo, which arrived like a sigh after a deep conversation. None of it was overly explained. The food didn't shout. It invited. Opening night was small. Soft launch. No press. Just friends of friends, a few respected chefs, and a couple of neighborhood regulars from her years in Midtown. The room filled slowly. The kitchen buzzed quietly. The courses flowed like breath. At the end of the night, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and no Instagram handle stood at the host stand and said, "This felt like therapy." "Thank you." Sophia cried in the walk-in freezer that night, not from stress, but from knowing that she had created something real. Word traveled faster than she'd expected. Within 6 months, Ellen was featured in New York Magazine's 10 restaurants that changed the game. Then came Bon Appetit, who praised it for restoring subtlety to a dining scene obsessed with spectacle. Food and Wine called her a quiet force reshaping American cuisine with grace and guts. Bookings became impossible on weekends. She began to see the same faces more than once, returning not for trends but for comfort, connection, care. Through it all, Sophia never told her family. Not once. Not out of spite, at least not entirely. But because she needed her success to exist independent of their approval. She wanted Elon to breathe without the weight of proving anything. She wasn't hiding, she was simply choosing silence over spectacle. And that she'd learned was its own kind of strength. Which was why when Clara's name appeared on the private reservation request form booked under her fiancé's assistant, Sophia didn't immediately react. The reservation was for 7 guests. Saturday, 7:30 p.m. A central table. The reason listed simply as family celebration. It was only when she saw the second contact email that she blinked. The booking had been facilitated through a corporate concierge service affiliated with an elite banking firm. And the person who had finalized it, Allison Hartley, her sister-in-law. Sophia didn't know Allison well. Nathan had married her after Sophia left for culinary school, and though their encounters had been civil at holiday gatherings, they had never crossed the threshold into intimacy. Allison was quiet, composed, and always seemed slightly tense at Hartley family dinners, like someone who knew the table had invisible rules and feared breaking them. But now Allison had chosen Ellen. Not because she knew, but because Elon had become that kind of place, the one you reserved when impressions mattered. The one whispered about between hedge fund brunches and gallery openings. The one you chose to look good. The irony wasn't lost on Sophia. Her family had finally walked into her world, not out of reconciliation, not out of apology, but because her creation had earned its own place in the world they respected, and they still didn't know it was hers. That, more than anything, felt like the quietest, most perfect triumph. The evening air was the kind that clung to skin, humid but restless, like the city was holding its breath. Sophia stood across the street from Elon for a long moment, watching the glow spill onto the sidewalk, amber and soft like honey. Through the window, she could see table 7 had already been set, white linen, custom plates, polished silverware. The champagne flutes shimmered with anticipation. Her staff had followed her instructions exactly. She was a guest tonight, not a chef. Not yet. Her black dress was simple. The strand of pearls around her neck had belonged to her grandmother, the only Hartley who ever once told her, "You don't have to be anything for them." Her hair was swept into a sleek knot. Understated elegance. A look that she knew her mother would misread as insufficient effort. That was fine. Tonight wasn't about proving anything, it was about ending a chapter. Inside the restaurant buzzed as it always did, the quiet hum of conversation, the rhythm of cutlery and laughter and more music. Everything time-tuned, everything hers. When she entered, Marcus, the most senior server, caught her eye immediately. His brows rose slightly, but she shook her head. Not yet. He nodded, slipping back into motion like a shadow. Sophia approached the table slowly, each step folding years of distance into something tangible. Her family had chosen the most prominent spot in the room, of course. Center table, center stage. They were arranged like an oil painting, Margaret Hartley and Chanel, Richard with his wine list already in hand. Clara draped in Gucci, her fiancé Bradley with hair so precisely slicked back it could have been lacquered. Nathan and Allison looked slightly more at ease, though Allison's eyes flitted nervously around the room. Her mother spotted her first. The inspection was instantaneous, eyes swept head to toe, calculating value, then landing with a tight-lipped smile. "Darling," she said, rising for a kiss that never quite touched. "We were beginning to wonder." "I'm exactly on time," Sophia replied softly, glancing at her watch. Her father rose, offering a hug that felt more like an obligation. "You look healthy," he said. In Hartley code, that meant you've gained weight. Clara didn't even rise. "This is Bradley," she announced, gesturing. "He's just made junior partner at Goldman." "No, nice to meet you. No, how have you been?" "Just credentials." As always. Bradley's handshake was firm to the point of being aggressive, a silent declaration of dominance. "Princeton undergrad. Wharton MBA," he added, unsolicited. "I heard you've been working in food." Sophia smiled lightly. "Among other things." She took her seat. Champagne arrived quickly. Second most expensive on the list. Flashy but not reckless, perfectly Hartley. Around them, Elon hummed with warmth, intimacy. Everything curated by Sophia's own hand. The menu, the pacing, even the linen weight had been considered. But as she sat among them, she might as well have been at a stranger's table. "I hope you don't mind," her mother said, as she sipped. "We've already ordered the wine." "Of course," Sophia replied. "I've heard it's quite good," Bradley smirked. "I've got a few connections. Called in a favor with someone who knows the management." Sophia nodded, letting him believe it. Let them all believe. When the amuse-bouche arrived, a delicate sphere of compressed watermelon with fermented black garlic and a singular microgreen, Jessica served it with grace. "Compliments of the kitchen," she said, her eyes brushing Sophia's for a moment. Recognition past quiet and loyal. Clara stared at the small bite with theatrical confusion. "This is it?" she asked. "I'm starving." "It's an amuse-bouche," Sophia offered gently. "A palate opener." Clara gave a dry laugh. "I know what an amuse-bouche is, Sophia. I'm not culturally illiterate just because I chose law school over whatever it is you're doing." Margaret tasted hers with the precision of a woman calculating calories per molecule. Richard popped it into his mouth, barely registering the flavor. Nathan and Allison smiled appreciative. Only Clara pushed hers aside untouched. Sophia said nothing. She didn't need to. The story was already being told bite by bite. The next course followed heirloom tomatoes with house-made ricotta and basil oil, a dish Sophia had reworked for months. As plates were set down, Bradley commented, "Now this looks promising." He swirled his wine with exaggerated flourish. "Wine list is decent, not exceptional, passable." Jose, their sommelier, caught Sophia's eye as he passed. She offered him a restrained smile. He too understood the performance unfolding. "So her mother began, tell us, what have you been doing these past few years?" Sophia looked at 5 pairs of eyes. "Measuring. Waiting. Working in food," she said simply. Clara sighed. "Still, with that phase, I figured you'd have moved on to something more substantial." "Not everyone's meant for corporate," Nathan offered, his voice mild but still edged. "Catering," Bradley guessed. "Line, cook, what exactly do you do?" "I've worn many hats," she replied, keeping her voice even. "Well, we're just glad you're supporting yourself," Margaret said, layering faux grace over condescension. "Though you know our door is always open if things become too difficult." The courses came and went, the scallops with brown butter emulsion, the handmade tagliatelle with mint and pancetta. Each dish was a chapter of her life. But to them, they were merely courses to be dissected. "This pasta," Richard muttered 3 bites, "and that's it." Bradley mangled the noodles with his knife. "Portion control, I guess. Must be some modern trend." Clara barely touched her food. "Too acidic," she declared of the tomato course, and the tomatoes could have been riper. Sophia remained quiet. When Jessica cleared the amuse-bouche and glanced at Clara's untouched plate, Sophia caught the flicker of disappointment in her server's eyes. Not for Sophia, but for the work. And still Sophia said nothing. Because this was the moment. To let them sit there and reveal themselves piece by piece, surrounded by everything she had built. Let them taste her life and not recognize it. Let them criticize it blindly, unaware they were tearing apart her soul on porcelain, and still she would not flinch. Because this was power. Not yelling. Not revenge served hot. Just letting them eat their own arrogance seasoned with grace. And in that silence, Sophia sat still. Not as the failure, not as the lost daughter, but as the architect of every single bite they didn't deserve. The 5th course had just been cleared when the check arrived, discreetly placed in a slim leather folder by Marcus, who slipped in with his usual elegance. Sophia watched the choreography unfold as if through glass. Her father Richard reached for it, instinctively, old habits of patriarchal pride, but was interrupted. "Please," Richard, Bradley said smoothly, lifting the folder. "Let me consider it a gesture for the occasion." There was the familiar show of generosity, the performance of dominance veiled in courtesy. Sophia said nothing. She sipped her wine, tasting citrus and salt and irony. Bradley opened the folder with a confident flick, expecting a number to boast about to solidify his role as future family provider. What he found instead knocked the smugness clean off his face. Sophia watched the flicker in his expression, surprise, confusion, calculation. There seems to be a mistake, he murmured, turning the folder toward Marcus as he approached. We've only been charged for the beverages. Marcus smiled politely, then looked at Sophia, his expression waiting for permission. She gave him a slight nod. No mistake, Sir Marcus said calmly. The dinner has already been taken care of. A pause. A beat of silence too thick to ignore. By whom? Richard asked, frowning. Marcus turned to Sophia, his professionalism softening into something warmer. By Chef Sophia, of course. Would you like me to charge the wine to her house account as well? It was as if the room itself had inhaled and forgot to exhale. Sophia set her glass down gently. Then she looked around the table at the wide eyes, the frozen faces, the disbelief. And she said without malice or flourish, "Welcome to my restaurant." Silence fractured the table like glass under pressure. What her mother finally managed, her voice thinner than usual. "This is yours." "Yes," Sophia said, folding her napkin. "I'm the executive chef and the sole owner of Elan." Her father leaned back, slowly blinking as if trying to place her in the picture. "You own this," he repeated, stunned. "But this is one of the most talked about restaurants in the city." Clara's jaw had gone slack. "You're the Sophia?" she asked, barely above a whisper. The chef Sophia nodded once. Apparently my phase got out of hand. Bradley glanced back at the menu, the wine list, the wall plaques he had failed to notice earlier. He looked as though someone had handed him a book and revealed it was written by the waitress he'd been ignoring. "I don't understand," Margaret said, reaching for her pearls, a familiar gesture when her world tilted. "Why wouldn't you tell us?" "Because I needed to know," Sophia said quietly. "If I had nothing, no title, no name, no status, would anyone at this table still respect me?" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The weight of truth landed heavier in silence. Her mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. Sophia continued, "All evening you've spoken about the food, the wine, the cost, like you were inspecting someone else's work. Like it was beneath you. And I let you. Because I needed to see." "To see what?" Clara asked sharply, color rising to her cheeks. "To see if anything had changed," Sophia said. "If the people who raised me, who claimed to love me, could look beyond status and truly see me. The answer is clear." Her father cleared his throat. "Now, wait a minute. We were just concerned about your future. You were concerned about your image," Sophia said, not unkindly. "About how my choices reflected on the family. You never once asked what made me happy." Clara looked down at her untouched amuse-bouche. "You let us eat your food, critique your restaurant, and you just sat there." "I did," Sophia said simply. "Because I wanted to hear who you really are when you think I'm no one." Bradley made a noise like he was going to speak, then didn't. The silence returned, this time laced with something heavier, realization. Margaret looked genuinely unsettled. "Darling, we didn't mean to judge. But you did." Sophia said, her voice soft. "All of you did. Without hesitation. Without knowing." Nathan finally spoke, voice low. "Soph, I didn't know." I know," she said gently. "You didn't know. None of you did. And that was the point." Marcus returned with a fresh pour of dessert wine. "Will you be joining your investors now, chef?" he asked, clearly playing his part with perfect timing. "Yes," Sophia said, standing slowly. "Please close out the wine under my name." She paused, looking one last time at her family. Her world. The ghosts of what she once wanted from them. "I don't need your applause," she added. "Just your honesty. That finally is enough." And then she walked away, shoulders straight, heels silent, every step a quiet thunder through the halls she had built. They sat frozen long after she left the table, like statues in a diorama they could no longer control. The music in the restaurant played on the scent of roasted pears and clove drifting from the kitchen, but at table 7 time fractured. It was Clara who finally broke the silence. "She let us sit here, judging her." No one answered. Because they all had. Margaret looked pale, as if she'd just realized she'd been speaking ill of her own daughter in her own house. "Why didn't she tell us?" she asked again, more to herself than anyone. Nathan shifted in his chair. Because none of us ever really listened when she did. Sophia returned 10 minutes later, not with anger, not with grandeur, but with calm. Her heels clicked softly on the polished floor as she stopped beside the table. "I don't mean to keep you," she said. "But I think you deserve to know the full story before you decide how you remember tonight." They said nothing, but their silence felt like an invitation. "I left business school with nothing but a duffel bag and $300," she began. "I moved into a converted attic in Queens. I shared it with mold-broken floorboards and 3 roommates who never remembered to pay rent on time. I took jobs no one wanted: bakery prep at dawn, line cook till midnight, weekend catering shifts that ended in me sleeping on park benches waiting for the first subway to run." Margaret covered her mouth. Richard looked down, jaw tight. "I burned through my savings in 4 months. Took out loans, skipped meals, bled through shoes." Her voice never wavered. "I didn't have health insurance, so when I sliced open my hand, I stitched it myself. I didn't have time to grieve the version of me you left behind because I was too busy surviving." Clara's fingers curled around her napkin. "But I kept going," Sophia continued. "I studied flavor theory on YouTube. Practiced knife skills at midnight with bruised produce. I made mistakes, but I learned. I learned faster than anyone around me. And eventually, someone saw that. Chef Laurent took me in. Taught me what it means not just to cook but to lead." She paused, eyes scanning theirs. "When you told me I was throwing my life away, what you meant was I was walking away from your vision of life. Not mine." Margaret's voice came trembling. If you had shown us this sooner, I did tell you, Mom." Sophia said, her voice still gentle but firm. "You called cooking the work of servants. You said no Hartley child would work behind a stove. I was 19 and I still remember how cold your voice was. You didn't ask what it meant to me. You didn't care how alive I felt in a kitchen. You cared that I was embarrassing." Margaret flinched. "That's not fair." "It's honest," Sophia replied. "And for the first time in years, I owe myself honesty more than I owe you comfort." Richard tried to recover. "But look at what you've done. It's impressive. You clearly have my business sense." "No," she said. "I have my sense. My grit, my fire. The only thing I inherited from this family was the idea that success matters more than love." Bradley, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally muttered, "You really built all this from scratch." Sophia turned to him, her eyes calm. "I built it from ashes." The words lingered. Clara hadn't looked up once. She now sat completely still, her amuse-bouche untouched and wilted. "You once laughed at me for playing with food," Sophia said, softer now. "But every plate you didn't finish tonight came from months of labor. From hands you never bothered to see. I wasn't angry about your critique. I was just sad. Sad that you still couldn't recognize care when it didn't look like what you expected." Clara finally met her eyes and, for the first time, didn't speak. Just nodded slightly. It wasn't enough. But it was something. Then Nathan stood. He moved slowly like someone walking into deep water. His voice was quiet but steady. "Sophia, I'm sorry." She blinked. It was the last thing she expected tonight. "I was too busy trying to stay in line," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Too afraid to rock the boat. You were always the brave one. And I didn't back you. I let them tear you apart, and I said nothing." Sophia swallowed. Her throat ached with something more than pride. He stepped closer. "You built something beautiful. Not just a restaurant. But something bigger. I see it now." She didn't trust her voice, so she just nodded. And somehow that meant more than any toast or applause ever could. Sunday morning arrived without ceremony. The sky over Manhattan was a soft gray, the kind that promised either rain or reflection depending on your mood. Sophia waited on the corner of 3rd and East 11th, just outside a place most people would miss unless they were looking for it, Alma. The paint was chipping near the doorframe. The windows fogged easily from the heat of the stove. There were mismatched chairs, menus printed on recycled paper, and a tiny bell that jingled when the door opened. To Sophia, it was holy ground. Alma was the first kitchen she'd ever loved that wasn't her own. She had scrubbed pots here, cracked hundreds of eggs before dawn. It was where she had once burned a tray of scones and cried in the dry storage room for 20 minutes. It was also the place where a line cook named May had slipped her a handwritten recipe for preserved lemon risotto saying, "You've got soul, don't waste it." It wasn't fancy, but it was hers in memory, if not name. Her family arrived just after 10. Margaret wore jeans, which felt almost surreal. Clara in sunglasses and a simple sweater looked like she'd spent the night turning over every word Sophia had said. Richard surprisingly had no newspaper in hand. And Nathan carried a tote bag full of snacks and distractions for his kids, Ben age 9 and Lily age 6, who ran towards Sophia like they had always known her. "Hey Chef," Auntie Ben shouted. Sophia smiled. Close enough. Inside, they were seated near the open kitchen. It smelled like rosemary and brown butter, coffee, toasted sourdough. No one tried to impress anyone else. There were no status games, no fancy introductions. They just ordered food. When the dishes arrived, shakshuka for Richard, sourdough French toast for Clara, soft poached eggs over herbed polenta for Margaret, the conversation paused. Not out of awkwardness, but reverence. Margaret took one bite of her eggs, then set her fork down slowly. "This is," she began, then stopped. Her eyes lifted to Sophia's. "How can something so simple taste like this?" Sophia smiled. "Because it's made with respect." Her mother didn't respond immediately, but her hand reached across the table and touched Sophia's wrist. Just briefly, just enough. Nathan was the first to finish. He leaned over to whisper something to Ben, who looked up with wide eyes. "Can we go see your kitchen sometime?" the boy asked. "Like where you really cook, I'd like that," Sophia said, surprised by the emotion that swelled in her chest. Nathan nodded. "They need to see that success doesn't always wear a suit and tie." Lily, chewing on a pancake, added thoughtfully, "Or heels." Everyone laughed. Later that afternoon, Sophia opened her inbox and found an email from her father. No subject, no message. Just a link to an article from The Atlantic titled, "The Women Redefining Power in the Kitchen," and in yellow highlight her name in the list. Nothing else. No sign-off. But it was something. That night, Sophia stood in Elan's kitchen after closing. The stainless steel gleamed. The herbs for tomorrow's prep rested in water like flowers. Everything smelled like lemon, oil, and bay leaf. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Margaret. "What would you think of Sunday dinner at our place?" No expectations, just food. Sophia stared at it for a long moment, then typed, "Only if we cook it together," and hit send. Saturday mornings at Elan had a different rhythm now. Gone were the late-night prep shifts and silent recovery hours after dinner service. Instead, the clatter of mixing bowls, the echo of laughter, and the hesitant but determined steps of young chefs filled the space. Sophia called it the Hearth Project, a mentorship program for culinary students from underserved communities. 8 trainees, each with their own story of hardship and hunger, had been chosen not just for skill but for heart. Zoe, the youngest among them at 17, had arrived with quiet eyes and calloused fingers. She rarely spoke above a whisper that first week. But her instincts were sharp and her palate even sharper. Sophia saw it right away, the way Zoe could smell a sauce, and guess what was missing, the way she observed then repeated technique with eerie precision. She reminded Sophia of herself, except maybe even braver. 2 months in, Sophia called Zoe into her office. There was a sealed envelope on the desk. "What's this?" Zoe asked. "Something I think you've earned," Sophia replied. It was a full scholarship to the Culinary Institute of America, funded by a private donor, one of Sophia's early investors, who had asked if she knew anyone like you 10 years ago. Zoe stared at it for so long Sophia wondered if she had read it all. Then came the tears. Not loud, not dramatic. Just one hand pressed to her mouth, shoulders shaking. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Sophia smiled. "Just promise me you'll make the table bigger when it's your turn." That afternoon, Sophia sat alone in her office, surrounded by notebooks, sticky notes, and stained recipe cards. She was outlining chapters for her cookbook, not just a manual but a memoir told in flavors. Each section would begin with a memory flour-dusted countertops in Lucia's kitchen as a child, the cracked tile floors of Alma, the burn on her arm from her first dinner rush at Aylin. Every dish would carry the emotion of a moment survived, a lesson learned. The title had come to her weeks ago on a walk home from the market. It wasn't about grandeur, it wasn't even about success. It was about arrival. A table of her own. The cover mock-up rested beside her. A simple table, one wooden chair, a plate of poached pears. And beneath the title in small but defiant font, I didn't ask for a seat at anyone else's table. I built my own. Sophia stared at it, letting the weight of the words settle. They weren't born out of bitterness anymore. They were born out of freedom. Her phone buzzed. A message from Zoe. Guess what I just did? Perfectly reduced my first Beret Blanc. Didn't burn the shallots this time, Sophia chuckled, her heart lifting. She typed back, you just earned the secret truffle oil shelf. Outside her office, the noise of the kitchen grew again, young voices learning, failing, rising. Sophia stood and looked through the glass. She used to think power meant getting the last word. That strength was sharpness and victory was being seen. But now she knew real power was building a space where others didn't have to fight to be seen at all. And in that space she had never felt more full. The kitchen was still warm from the evening rush. Outside, the city glowed with its usual defiant light, yellow and sharp against the early spring darkness. But inside Ellen all was quiet. The knives had been cleaned, the aprons hung neatly in the staff closet, and the countertops gleamed under the low light she insisted be installed to feel more like moonlight than fluorescent glare. Sophia sat at her usual table near the back of the kitchen, a worn leather notebook open before her, her pen resting between fingers still stained faintly with saffron and beet juice. The day had ended with a full house, the kind of Saturday night most chefs prayed for. Every table booked 2 surprise celebrities in the corner booth, and not a single plate returned unfinished. And yet none of that occupied her mind now. Not the revenue. Not the praise. Not even the brief handshake from a Michelin inspector she suspected had dined anonymously that evening. What filled her chest now wasn't pride. It was peace. Real peace. The kind that doesn't arrive with applause but with silence. With knowing you've done the right work in the right place for the right reasons. She reached for the pen, glanced down at the final page of her cookbook manuscript, the one she had left blank for weeks because she didn't know how to end a story that still felt like it was unfolding. But tonight, something inside her had settled like a dish coming together in the final seconds before plating. She began to write slowly, deliberately, tasting each word in her head before letting it flow from the ink. The recipes in this book, she wrote, are not just instructions. They are apologies no one knew how to make. They are love letters never sent. They are grief and joy and survival written in olive oil, salt, and citrus. Every dish is a story I didn't have the courage to speak aloud, so I learned to tell it in flavor instead. She paused, staring at the sentence as if it had spoken back to her. And, in a way, it had. Because it was true. All of it. Each chapter of her book was more than an arrangement of ingredients, it was a map of her becoming. A bowl of soup that reminded her of Lucia's kitchen on rainy days. A tart that mirrored the acid she once swallowed as silence during family dinners. A perfectly crisp duck breast that spoke of nights spent crying into cutting boards when she thought she wasn't enough. She glanced over at the mock-up cover on her tablet. The title, A Table of Her Own. The subtitle had taken even longer to decide. But in the end it had to be this: I didn't ask for a seat at anyone's table. I built my own. It wasn't arrogance, it was truth. A quiet, steady truth born from fire and failure, and the belief that passion, when nurtured, respected, and trusted, can create not just food but belonging. And in building Aylin, she hadn't just built a restaurant, she'd built a language. A home. A world. The ping of her inbox broke the silence. A new email marked urgent TEDx, Beacon invite. Her brows lifted slightly. Curious, she opened it. The message was short, sincere, and unexpected. A curator from TEDx had visited Aylin last month and had been so moved by the experience, not just by the food but by the unspoken story behind each dish, that they were curating a new series under the theme The Taste of Truth. They wanted Sophia to be a speaker. The invitation ended with one line in bold. Your story doesn't just feed people, it frees them. And we believe the world needs to hear it. She sat still for a long moment, letting the words settle like flour into dough. There was a time not long ago when she would have doubted her worth in that room on that stage. When she'd have wondered whether her story, unglamorous and unpolished, could hold space next to political analysts and Nobel laureates. But not now. Not after all this. Not after learning that truth wasn't always loud. It didn't need microphones or spotlights. Sometimes it came served on warm plates. In quiet bravery. In showing up again and again when the world had told you to sit down. She smiled slowly. Yes, she would say yes. But she wouldn't give a speech, not the traditional kind anyway. She would talk about a different kind of language, the one that comes through caramelizing onions slowly until they confess sweetness. Through broth stirred over hours that tastes like home. Through food that carries silence and makes it feel like song. This time she whispered to the empty room, I'll speak in the language I know best, flavor. She stood, turned off the last prep light, and made her way out into the city, night the breeze cool on her cheeks, the kind that promised something was shifting. A new season. A new voice, hers. And somewhere in a bookstore not yet built, a reader would one day hold her cookbook, turn to the final page, and read the same words she had just written, feeling perhaps for the first time that their own story might also be worth telling. Because sometimes the most meaningful success isn't winning the applause of those who once doubted you. It's finally realizing you never needed it.